Part 1, Provenance. Chapter 1, Operation Sunburn, May 2021, La Paz, Mexico. As the first terrifying images burst into the healing oblivion of his slumber, Clayton knew they weren't real. But that knowledge was fleeting and quickly irrelevant. In the timeless, slow motion of imagination, the swirling phantasms sucked him into the rising tide of the nightmare. Even in his dream state, he tried to hold on to reason, tried to stay tethered to some remnant of his dissolving reality. His struggles only pulled him down faster, until he was submerged in the dark waters of his merciless subconscious. Completely immersed, he fought to regain his wits through the dream world's shock-induced haze. Coming slowly to his senses, he became aware that he was floating in the warm, salty water of some unnamed ocean, not knowing why he was there or even who he was. A gentle breeze carried the acrid smell of recent combat. Repetitive swells of a dozing sea, alternately pushed under him, lifted him towards a star-speckled darkness, and then let him slide into their troughs as they rolled on. Water washed over his face as he glided to the bottom of each descent, and when he licked his lips, he could taste the salt and the metallic tang of blood. The thick clouds that hid one section of the sky parted enough to unveil a full moon, and he closed his eyes against the unwelcome brightness. He rested that way for a moment, trying to pull some fragment of recollection out of the stubborn blackness. In the distance, he could hear someone crying out for help, calling his name. The panicked voice was female, and even in its urgent pitch, familiar. Something touched his cheek. Startled, he opened his eyes to see a hand floating by his face. As he looked at the moonlit water around him, he could make out other limbs, a leg, and another, and then another arm. He tried to raise his hand to brush the offending limb from his face, but his body did not respond. His brain commanded his legs to propel him away, but with no effect. Terror now became the current that carried him as he recognized the severed appendages as his own. The scream that began in the back of his throat was cut off as he slid into another trough. This time, his descent was unchecked, and as the black water pulled him down, his final thoughts were of all the questions that remained unanswered. Clayton cautiously opened one eye to the dim light of the room and took a moment to convince himself that he was still alive. The scream of a distant siren fused his nightmare to reality. He was wet with sweat, and his lips tasted of salt. The ceiling fan had delivered little relief from the warm, humid air in his low-budget La Paz hotel room. Tourists had air conditioning, but he wasn't a tourist. Encouraged by the mundane discomforts of the still living, he pulled himself from the damp, clinging bedsheets and sought rebirth from the hotel's tepid shower. He couldn't remember the first time this nightmare, or one like it, had left him sweaty and shaken, but he knew the series of events that spawned the demon dreams of his troubled sleep. The evolving night terrors had become a surreal and frightening mix of bits of experience, smatterings of regrets, and dollops of grief. Each time, they became more detailed and more intense. Each time, he felt them further erode the comforting boundary between dismissible fiction and disturbing recollection. each time he stuffed them into his crowded mental attic with all his other demons. He needed to find some coffee. But first, it was time for Clayton Rhodes to become Bill Crawford. Mr. Crawford had an important interview today. Clayton looked at himself in the room's cracked wall mirror, ruefully noting the symbolic accuracy of the fractured image. With some effort, his careworn face took on a lighter, more relaxed aspect, and he looked younger, closer to his age. He hadn't shaved, and his 2-day bristle contributed to the appearance of a subpar employment status. He stepped back, loosened his typically erect posture, a legacy of his military background, and relaxed into a more suitable slouch. Finally satisfied, he donned a bright Hawaiian shirt, pulled his unwilling face into a roguish smile, and Bill Crawford ambled out into the dull, red-hued early morning light in search of coffee. Who is Clayton Rhodes? What are the demons that haunt him? Why is he disguising himself as Bill Crawford? What is this important interview? Hi, I'm CJ Kichuk. Thanks for taking the time to watch my little production. I hope you've enjoyed this first bit of bits and are curious enough to want more. Many adventures are in store for Clayton and the fascinating cast of characters that make up his world. I hope you decide to join us